Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Andrea Weckerly, and welcome to the Ready Living Podcast, where each episode is designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to create the life you want. Thanks for joining us, and remember to subscribe for free on your favorite platform. My guest today is Ken Dolan-Del Vecchio, a family therapist with 30 years' experience. He is an award-winning leader in the field of workplace mental health. He spent 19 years in corporate America, retiring in 2017 from his role as Vice President Health and Wellness of Prudential Financial, where he oversaw behavioral health for over 20,000 employees. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Fast Company, Fox Business News, Inc., Entrepreneur, and other print media, keynoted at Prudential, Deutsche Bank, Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan Chase, Novartis, Edward Jones, the City of New York, and other places. And he is the author of 4 books and numerous publications in the family therapy literature. He earned his bachelor's degree in biopsychology at Cornell University and his master's degree in social work at Hunter College of the City University of New York. Additionally, he completed a 3-year intensive postgraduate program in family therapy at the Multicultural Family Institute in Highland Park, New Jersey. Welcome, Ken.
Nice to be with you, Andrea.
Let me start out with something that I've been thinking about a lot. Right now, things are really challenging. Economic uncertainty, industry shifts, AI disruption, layoffs, widening income inequality, and social instability. How does the current landscape impact modern workplaces and workplace culture?
A huge number of Americans are not at all happy with their work. It ranges from 50% in some surveys up to the 80s, 85%. I mean, there's a number of reasons for dissatisfaction, and they often have to do with the structure of work. There's an enormous amount of pressure, many employees, particularly in the corporate realm, because there is increasing sense that you can get more and more and more productivity out of the people who are present. At the same time, their jobs are incredibly insecure. Layoffs are happening constantly. And the leaders in most organizations are just not very skilled at leading. Most people who are in some kind of people management role got there because they were proficient technicians of one sort or another. And they were great at that. And the next promotion was to be in a role where you have people who report to you. Most people who are in those roles are woefully unprepared. They are often not feeling comfortable about asking for training or asking for mentorship because that inadequacy in leadership is something that goes all the way up the chain of command. One does not want to appear weak or unskilled. So what you have are situations where it's kind of the luck of the draw when it comes to your particular supervisor.
You're an expert in workplace health, morale, and productivity, and you've emphasized that workplace culture deeply affects individuals' health because so many people are taught to build their identity around what they do. What are the dangers of that?
It's incredibly dangerous these days because work is so precarious in many settings. It's very important to have a sense of identity that is not bound by work. Early on in my time at Prudential, I had a new supervisor come in. He's a really great guy. He said, I was at AT&T for a very long time, and then I'm coming to Prudential, and there were 2 weeks during which I didn't have a logo associated with me, and that was really anxiety producing. I remember saying, you got to work on that. Because if your identity is tied to work, it conveys a certain kind of loyalty. That is not returned. It doesn't come back to you. I worked in mental health for a number of years, and one of the later roles I had was as a psychiatric social worker. I loved this work. And then one day, the senior leadership in the hospital cut the treatment team in half. And I was let go, and my colleague, who was a psychologist, was let go, and a number of us were let go. It was incredibly traumatic for me because I had tied my identity to that. I liked the hospital a great deal. It was a really great team. One of the decisions that I came to is I will never again tie my sense of myself to a workplace. And so when I got my job at Prudential, which I got in 1998, I made sure that I never felt that kind of connection again to my employer. And in fact, I told one of the leaders who I reported to, I said, this is my day job. I do good work here, as you know, but this is not the whole of it. And that was very important to me. And I'll say something else about the way I think people ought to regard their work, particularly if they are in a large organizational structure where there is the likelihood at some point of downsizing. You should realize that you actually have 3 jobs. You don't have just one. You have the job that you're contracted for. You go to work and you perform every day. But you also have the job of stewarding your career path. And that requires you to be paying attention to the larger environment outside of your workplace. It requires you to keep your resume updated. It requires you to broaden your network in terms of the contacts that you have. It requires you to be looking forward to your goals so that you have a sense of where you want to go. You need to have a plan for your career. Should you be in some kind of mentoring relationship? What should you be doing to go further than where you are? Or if you feel entirely comfortable, at least having options, knowing that you have options, what the job opportunities look like in your discipline. That's your second job, is stewarding your career. And your third job is managing your finances, making sure that you are producing savings over time. I've done a fair amount of speaking to social workers, to therapists. And when I say this to them, they will often chuckle and say, we don't make any money. And I'll say to them, all the more reason that you have to be extremely careful with it. You've got to be saving. If you have even enough to begin to invest, you should invest. I mean, that is your personal security. That is your ability to take care of yourself in the most basic ways. Now, in a different society, in a society that had more of a social safety net, perhaps it wouldn't be so vital. My son and his wife right now live in Germany. She's German. It's a different world there. If you lose your job, you don't lose your medical coverage. You're not likely to end up homeless. Totally different here.
I'm so glad you said that. What does a healthy workplace look like?
Well, we did a lot of work on this at Prudential. And the framework is one that has multiple systems levels. When you look at an individual, we conceptualize health as crossing a number of dimensions. So health is being physically well. It is being emotionally well. It's being socially connected, socially well, spiritually connected, engaged in activities that connect me with that which is greater than myself in a way that feels purposeful and meaningful, and also financially well. The workplace, optimally, is a place that supports individuals being optimally well in those areas. And what that comes down to is, more than anything else, your immediate supervisor and the way that they construct the culture of your work group. When it comes to being physically well, does your workplace offer some of the basics? Like, does it offer health insurance? Does your supervisor model basic aspects of health? Like, do they take a lunch? Do they talk about that they get enough rest and that they not send you emails at 1 a.m.? The reality is that when most people get an email from their boss, they feel pressure to respond, whatever time it is. And so it's important to realize, if you are that type, pend them, send them in the morning. Don't do that to your people. People emulate you. They pattern themselves after you. That's part of the physical realm. And the emotional, do you treat people with kindness, with respect, giving them constructive feedback in a way that's always respectful? That's crucial, absolutely crucial. Are you being a model for being emotionally well, being a person who is generally level with their mood and positive in their way of approaching other people? And then when it comes to the social realm, are you paying attention to the ways that people are interacting with one another? If you see people who are being uncivil, do you note that that's a performance issue? The very first performance expectation for every single one of us is that we behave in a way that is consistently safe, civil, approachable, respectful toward others. If you or team members are not meeting that performance requirement, you've got a performance problem. How many times do we hear about somebody who is maybe a diva, or maybe they're the kind of person who you kind of have to watch their attitude from a distance before you approach them? There shouldn't be people like that. You call them on that, and you call them on it as soon as you see it happening. If you let negative behavior go, if you look the other way, you give it space, it will almost always fill that space. It will grow. and you will become less respected and reliable as a leader. People are watching everything you do. And when it comes to the spiritual piece, are you as a leader letting your people know how what they do provides some contribution to the social good that the company is hopefully doing? Do you tell people with some regularity, even if their role isn't at the forefront of what the company or the organization is delivering? You as a leader, you are the seed, you are the centerpiece of your culture, of your workplace culture. And if you're doing those things, it's very likely that people are going to be doing their best. Because the more you talk to a person regularly about what they do right, it clears the terrain for giving them constructive guidance. One of the things that I've often spoken with supervisors about is you don't want to become a person's counselor. You don't want to be their pseudo-therapist because then you can't hold them accountable. If you become very, very close with people who are part of your team, that begins to look like favoritism to the other members of your team. It begins to look like maybe you are giving them some slack that you wouldn't give other people. One always has to understand when you're a supervisor or a leader at any level that what we see in leadership cascades. We now have a person in the most senior role in our government who is a bully, who is constantly saying hostile things to others. What that does is it sets up a norm for leadership, and that's really problematic.
How do you help people distinguish normal stress?
I'm going to recommend a great book, Dime for a Paycheck. It's written by a professor named Jeffrey Pfeffer. I had the privilege of interviewing him for a podcast that I did. He's at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And he talks about how the stress of workplaces is really making many people ill. One of the things that I've told many people is in many workplaces, you cannot count on the workplace to set limits. You have to set limits. And generally, in highly stressful environments, there's a certain degree of self-selection that goes on. And people who work in those environments thrive on that kind of intensity, let's say. But in general, we should be able to feel like the workload that we've got is adequate, but not overwhelming. One of the ways that we attenuate stress is by knowing that we have some autonomy and we're in some degree of control of the work that we do. And that we are given adequate reward, that we're given adequate recognition. These are the kinds of things that will help people to continue to function healthily in a fairly stressful environment. But we do have to put limits. And that means that we have to decide that our day is up at a certain time and we shut it off. It means that we take our breaks, we take a lunch, we take vacation. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, I didn't take any vacation this year. And to me, that is not anything positive. That is showing that you are participating in your own self-degradation.
We live in an era of extreme wealth at the top and insecurity for everyone else. There are case studies of organizations that handle downturns by sharing sacrifice more equitably instead of defaulting to layoffs. We know layoffs often don't even deliver the long-term benefits companies expect. So why are those models still the exception rather than the norm?
I asked this question of Jerry Pfeffer, and he gave me a horrifying answer. He said, it's tradition. He said, it's just what people do. He said, look, all the data tells us that it's not constructive. It doesn't help stock prices. It doesn't help productivity. In fact, it's an assault on productivity because it's a rupture to the work organization. It gets rid of institutional knowledge. It puts people on edge. It destroys morale. It creates survivor guilt in the people who survive, and it injures the reputation of the company. When people leave an organization, hopefully they leave of their own accord, you want them to be an ombudsperson. We always did group interviews at Prudential. There might be a discussion about, well, this person isn't going to stay here very long because they want to get their PhD and they want to move on. And I would always say, you want people who have that kind of energy and drive and initiative, and you want their experience here to be great, and we want to learn from them. And then when they leave, you want them to say what a great thing it was to work within this group. Nobody's going to stay here forever. But a lot of people don't have that way of thinking about it. Downsizing is not a good thing. What I've seen it be is an exercise of power. As a clinician and as an organizational actor, I'm a student of power. The way I see it, there are two main ways one can use power. One is power over, and that is the power to dominate. That is the power to say, you'll do what I say you're going to do. You do it when I say you're going to do it. And that's the way it's going to be. And then power with is the use of power as responsibility to help create shared results, shared positive results. And everywhere in the world, we see power as domination. In a power as domination model, everything is about ranking, who's right and who's wrong, and about punishment. All of this negativity is there. Whereas if you are operating from a power with perspective, you are welcoming differences because differences are the ways that we learn. You ask, how can we learn from each other? You ask, how can we do this together in a way that is going to help us to get to a better place than we would if I just told you what I think you should do? In a power with way of thinking, we're always generating more power. Power over, there's like a fixed amount of power. Somebody else has power, then probably you've got less. The women's movement was struggling for parity with men because men tended to feel like, well, if women gain power, then what are we going to lose? Not that we're actually all going to gain. Or if queer people get marriage rights, somehow that's going to take away from us. It's absurdity.
It's nonsensical. Yeah.
And if you are an institutional leader, you really want to think about what are you conveying to people in terms of their value relative to you and their contribution relative to yours. Because as a leader, you generate results through collaborative action. It's not what you do, it's what we do.
You worked extensively on workplace violence prevention and created an enterprise-wide domestic violence awareness campaign while at Prudential.
Intimate partner violence is the point of origin for about a third of workplace violence incidents.
That seems like a lot.
Well, it is. And that is because the conflict that's going on outside often will spill into the workplace. The perpetrator of violence, and I'll call it a him because it's much more likely in a heterosexual relationship that the man is the perpetrator. Not always, but it's much more likely. He will often do things threatening to the workplace. He will come to the workplace to make sure she's actually there. He'll call others in her vicinity if he can't reach her to see if she's actually at work. He will sometimes come and do things that are aggressive to her while she's at work. It's a good thing in any workplace to have a domestic violence and intimate partner violence awareness campaign and to make it clear that you are not going to be penalized if you bring this forward, if you let somebody know. It's probably going to be human resources. It may be a health and wellness or a behavioral health or an EAP provider. It might be a security provider, and they're going to, together with you, figure out how do we keep you as safe as possible. We know that there are signifiers of the potential for violence. The first one is a known history of violent behavior. History predicts future behavior. If we have history and threats, we're in a tricky place with that. And if we have history and threats and we know a person, for example, has weapons, that's really worrisome. If we know a person or we suspect a person has a substance abuse issue, that's another worrisome side, particularly with the first two, with threats and a history of violence. It's very important, if at all possible, for an organization of any size to have a team that is ready to grapple with any kind of concern that suggests the potential for workplace violence. And again, that would be threats backed up by a history of violence or really anything that raises concerns. So if a person is behaving in a way that's particularly irritable and the supervisor is worried about that, they bring it to HR, HR brings it to the team, and you have a conversation about how to approach them.
Say somebody's been laid off or they still have a job and they realize it's an environment that they don't want to be in any longer. And they're trying to evaluate other organizations to apply to. When companies say people are our greatest asset, what concrete behaviors should employees or potential employees look for to tell whether that's actually true or whether it's just empty words used in the marketing materials?
So it's usually bullshit. It's utter bullshit. It's something that most companies will say. You know what sociopathy is, right? Sociopaths are people who don't have a conscience, who are all about winning, who are all about using other people, who will lie. About 1 out of 25 people are thought to be sociopaths. It's a wonderful book called The Sociopath Next Door. Martha Stout is the author. She's also written another book that's called something like Dealing with or Managing the Sociopath Next Door. It's a more recent book, both of which are just brilliant and really helpful. Sociopaths rise in organizational life, and organizations often behave sociopathically. To downsize people is pretty sociopathic. Whereas what the alternative you describe is senior leaders reduce their income and they hold on to people, or in some countries, they are required to hold on to people. And sometimes the government will stipend some of the salaries so that the company doesn't have as much of a loss. Downsizing is sociopathic behavior. It's incredibly violent emotionally and economically to a person, spiritually, all of that. And it's done by organizational leadership. What I think is important is when you interview with a company, you notice what you see there. Do they look like they're engaged and they're feeling positive, or do they look like drones with their heads down? When you have the interview, how are you treated? Are you welcomed? Ask, what's it like here? What's the stress level like here? And see what you get. You can even ask, can I speak to people who would be my peers? And if they're willing to do that and they're proud of what people are going to say, that's a really good sign. You have to interview as much as being interviewed, which again is just a really trying thing in these times. People are our greatest asset. That's the buzz phrase. People are a liability, really. That's the way senior leadership sees it. Most everybody works in an organization that would love to find a way to not have to employ us anymore. I mean, that's the way it is because there's so much emphasis on the profit and on the bottom line. As a supervisor, you say to people, I'm always paying attention to what's out there and what's available. Talk to people in a way that's honest. One of the things I would always say to supervisors is don't lie to people. It is far better to say, I am not at liberty to tell you that now. The answer to your question is something that I'm not at liberty to share. Better than to say, I don't know. Because people know when you're lying. That's a breach of trust. One of the great failings of organizational life is that a lot of people who are in leadership roles, it's just not their aptitude. It's a very different aptitude than being an individual contributor.
Where can people find you online to learn more about your work?
They can find me at kendolandelvecchio.com. They can find me at Blowing the Whistle on Workplace Crazy. It's a Substack. What I'm doing now a lot of is integrating my focus on relationships to my focus on our relationship with the natural world and our fellow Earthlings. I do a podcast with my colleague, Nancy Saxton Lopez, once a week on YouTube and on all the different podcast outlets, The Pet Loss Companion. There's also a Substack called The Pet Loss Companion, Conversations on Loss and Healing. Permaculture is sort of the effort to be more part of the cycles of nature in a way that's healing and not entirely extractive. That's something I've been exploring for a long time as well. I have an orchard, I have berry bushes, I compost, and I use the compost in my permaculture environment. I'm devoting a lot of time to that these days.
Ken, thank you so much for having taken the time today.
Well, you're very welcome. It was a fun conversation.